Recommendations for herbals. Uh, I suppose this was just a quick quote from Charaka, which tells you about the dosage of the medicines. And it's very important to know that when you say it's safe, nothing is safe in life. Whatever is useful will have its side effects, irrespective of what therapy it has, what kind of medications, either traditional or it is a modern medication. So it's already mentioned there, it becomes a poison in case if you use it, out of the range of what is mentioned. So whenever a herbalist or a person who is a treatment doctor gives you a drug, it's always useful that you follow the regulations, though it can be herbal or a modern medicine. So that's a quite big rule here I would like to mention. Again, specifically, that's how my flow will be of the presentation. I'll go just quickly to the key points, not mentioning it. Again, the presentation can be made available if required. Talking about the importance about safety, the isolation of the key medications, you can see here about an anti-malarial drug. It's quite very effective, which is just out. And you can see the herb in there is Artemisia, which is quite popular. Not going into it, it's useful even in modern medicine. Talking about the herb, specifically, I would like you to concentrate on only the highlighted points. The slide is not to be read, can be done later. It mentions about what exactly is the definition of herb. It mentions about who is not considered herb and why are we talking about the safety concerns. So when we talk about herb, like I said, mentioned earlier, it's will have its side effects. It's not, it will not have. And I genuinely think that whichever regulatory authorities have questions on the safety, they have a right to do so because we're talking about a patient who is the end consumer of that molecule. So any form of plant, it can be leaves, stem, flowers, roots, seeds. When you call it, it comes under herbs. Why safety? The last point here, because a herb can have multiple ingredients. Even a single herb, you've seen the TLC or the HPTLC slide, it has different kinds of photos kind of thing, which you see, these are the ingredients in the plant. So it's not a single ingredient, it's a list of ingredients. Again, the herb can be of a stem, of a leaf together. So it will have whatever constituents the stem has, whatever constituents the leaves has. So a single herb also and a combination will have different ones. When you talk about ginkgo biloba, you can see the scan there, which is the HPLC identification of that drug, which tells you about the different kinds of ingredients which are there in that herb. Now, it's very much risky again because we cannot isolate a single amount, kind of ingredient out of it. Now there are 5 of them. You can see the constituents of ginkgo, and that's how it's been isolated, and that's how fingerprinting can be done to understand that this is that molecule which is there in the final product, and that's how it's used to isolate it. There are different terms, definitions. Quickly, I'll go through it. Of course, you might be aware about it. We know what's a traditional use, long-term use of a molecule. When you say I'm a traditional doctor, that's what you do. A therapeutic activity is the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of it. When you say it's a therapeutic activity of the drug. When you say active ingredients, so whenever I use the word active ingredients in that chromatogram, there can be active ingredients, there can be only ingredients which can be used for fingerprinting. So not necessarily that is an active ingredient which has a clinical importance. Okay, so active ingredients is that with a therapeutic activity which can prevent, diagnose, as well as treat kind of illness. Okay, so when I showed it on the earlier side of ginkgo, it's not that all the 5 flavonoids will be active and will be useful in the patient. It can be, it cannot be. Okay, it can be used even only for, that's the second point. It's not possible to identify an active ingredient of all the herbs which are present in the market. It becomes quite difficult, and that's one of the limitations which we have. We know what's a side effect. We know the adverse events. In a safety, few things are quite important. When you say an adverse event or an experience an adverse reaction, these are the 2 important things which are quite important for us. And as a medical practitioner, you're supposed to report any adverse event to the authority. Either it can be a medical doctor, or as an patient, it can be reported, or a nurse. Talking about the adverse events, any untoward medical occurrence during the treatment of any pharmaceutical products which might not have the relationship with the treatment. Now, this is very important. You have taken a drug. It's the same definition which you use in modern medicine. You have taken a drug. Maybe the patient was giddy and fell down. He has taken antihypertensive, maybe it's responsible or not, but it becomes an event, you have to report it. So that's an adverse event or a safety adverse event. And reaction is a response to that drug, whichever drug you're taking. So again, as a herb, all this is necessary for us to note and share it across with the authorities. Signal detection is something which you would have heard. Signal detection is the information which might have a relation with the adverse event and the drug for the patient, which you have to write down and share it across in the information provided to the regulatory authorities. Now, these are all the terms which are important when you talk about pharmacovigilance. So when you talk safety of a drugs, it's the pharmacovigilance, which is very crucial, very important for all the drugs. So pharmacovigilance is a science and the activities, anything which deals with assessment, understanding, and prevention of these adverse events. So if you know the pharmacovigilance of a drug, it's necessary to have a system which runs through it. And every government has its own national pharmacovigilance center in their own countries. I suppose we know about it. US has its own, EU has its own, India has its own center. So every government has its own national pharmacovigilance center, which detects the signals, captures this, and then shares it across. So if there's a requirement of any change in the drugs PI or the pack insert, it gets changed here. When you talk about toxicity, the herbal drugs we have seen, there's a lot of involvement and a complexity in this. Major issue is that when you talk about safety, herbs, it's very difficult to do it. The toxicity as an efficacy may be result of a mixture of these active compounds. What have been seen is if you isolate a single compound, like I said, it can be active, but I'm not sure whether it is clinically active and useful for the patient. But when you isolate that compound using HPLC or TLC and use it, then it requires safety studies, toxicity studies, because now it is separated from the main plant or the crude plant, and it needs to follow all the guidelines which I mentioned in my earlier session of standardization, because it becomes a separate entity as its own. Now, a little bit about US FDA. We know it very well that in 1994, there was DSHEA, which classified it as an dietary supplements. And I really feel bad when I see this, because it's a medicinal product, usually goes as a herb, okay, which goes as a dietary supplement. So the patients might not be aware what they're taking, whether they're overdosing themselves, whether they are, what the dose which they have been taking. So this is something which is very much of concern. So the concern here is the difference between a drug and a dietary supplement. As per US FDA goes, that a dietary supplement may not claim to diagnose, cure, mitigate, treat, or prevent illness, but the patient, the end person who is consuming it, might be taking it to do one of it. Yeah, so it might not state it's a kind of herb, food supplement, but a patient at the end in US might be taking it to use in any of the definitions which I said as a therapeutic one. So that's a kind concern thing. When you see a dietary supplements, they can be produced. So you penetrate the market, but it can be sold, marketed, without demonstrating the safety and efficacy as it's required for any of the isolated compound or any of the modern drug development molecules which are out in the in the countries right now. So that's again a concern here. Why are we talking? 3 slides on that, but I'm not going to go all details. I've just emphasized on key case studies and why safety is important. I'll just read the key points. You can see a drug which was given, which developed end-stage renal disease, that was again published. Now, this is all bad publicity, which unfortunately is being seen by the herbal medicine. There was another medicine and the molecules which said there to be acting on the other drugs, including, and these might produce toxicity. Now, when we are taking a single drug, and if you are also taking some other maybe medicinal product, there can be an interaction, drug-to-drug interactions. Have we studied that? There's again a query on that. So we don't know the safety of those 2 molecules working together. Some other is that there's a lot of drugs which are used also in India, which contains heavy metals in it. Have we tested the contents of it? That's quite a query, and there are a lot of reports out there. The second is some herbs are known to interact with the pharmaceutical drugs, and this all kind of information is quite risky. So I've given the references. You can go through the case reports, and these are the main issues which the patient looks at in the media which is available for them. Everyone is on the media and gives a wrong kind of direction and a view for the patient, saying that it is not a right drug or a therapy which I'm using. Okay. But here, just one quick thing, a catchy thing, which is again published, which says that the true frequency of side effects are not known. Because if you read these reports carefully, the N number is very small. So you say my 10 patients took it and all of them had hepatotoxicity. My 5 patients took it, but they had a kidney failure. How much is the truth in it? Have they done any double-blind clinical studies on that to prove it? There's a question, but the bad publicity is already out. So this point also needs to be understood. Regulatory requirement from an FDA, which could improve the safety, is that one is we need to register it on an US FDA website, mandating the safety test similar to that to OTC products. All the health claims needs to be provided or supported by data. And the product label should have accurate list of all the ingredients. Very important if you want to market it there. Different rules, I won't go in the details. I can help you out in case if it's required. There are different regulatory authorities which are into this. You have MPC, European Medical Agency. You have THMRS, you have MHRA, UK, which goes with it. You have US FDA, you have WHO guidelines, which you can refer to. You have Drugs and Cosmetics Act, which is there in India. So different guidelines. 4 slides tells you about all the WHO guidelines, which are in relation to this, which we need to follow in cases we really need to follow what the guidelines says. I have just highlighted the safety one because that's the talk for today. You also have US and the India guidelines in these few slides, which will again help you to go through it if it's required. The herbal drugs guidelines, EMEA guidelines, all of them, again, important for us if you really want to market it in the EU. For the safety, these are the guidelines. So there's a huge list of guidelines. I know it must be like, oh my God, these are the guidelines, but you need to follow it if you want to bring it to the market. Requirement for safety is quite clear. Identification, nature of the adverse event for each drug which you are trying to take it ahead. Management of the risk, institution to measure and prevent this risk. So once you share it across, it needs to be done. And the last is good communication. And this is very crucial. Communication to who? Not only to doctors, nurses, but also to common people. They should know that there are adverse events. Any therapy available on the earth will have adverse events and they need to report it. WHO proposes this. It's already working and it's already on the net, which I suppose you must be knowing about the UMC, which is a key observer, which updates each and every information on this. The best thing is they have come up with a code, and I'll share it across in a few moments. It's available for any of the country, they can use it. But what does it monitor? These are the things which they're trying to monitor, and they're trying to classify it into a code system so that by every code, the same way as you classify the modern medicine, it will capture all these codes into the herbal medicine code. So it's a very good practice now that you're able to understand it, what medicine causes what kind of effect, and it can be available. So the CIOMS, or you call it as the Council of International Organizations of Medical Sciences, it's the report which comes in across. It challenges the non-prescription medicines, recommends it, reports it if there are any suspected adverse events or reports which are there, and needs to do it. Now, what to report and what is this coding is what I'll tell you in bit. The signals I've already spoken about. Signals are anything which you come to know when you take that drug and there's a kind of risk associated with it. So you need to investigate that to see which drug is causing it, and that needs to be reported back to the manufacturing firm or to ask them, or you have to look into the PSURs in case if they have reported that in the periodic safety reports, and you have to manage the data properly. WHO, again, like I said, has an HATC. I think you need to remember this name. Every person who is into herbal this needs to know this. It proposes a herbal, anatomical, therapeutic, chemical classification where it classifies, and this is the code. It classifies all the drugs available into this code. And this coding tool permits us to understand individual herbal products because it speaks with all pharmacopoeias, with Indian pharmacopoeia, with Chinese pharmacopoeia, which speaks with them. It captures that data, and also the data is processed. So you'll be able to understand which drug, what toxicity it can cause. So it's working. So it speaks with WHO DD. That's the drug dictionary. So it's a little bit on that. So maybe you can read the slides. I can email it to you. It tells you about what happens with that drug. So it classifies it from the anatomical site of pharmaceutical action and the range, the therapeutic range. So what is the drug range? The safety range where the patient can be given the drug. So 1 gram, 2 gram, what are the drug studies done on it? If you give it more than 4 grams per day, what's going to be the effect on the patient? Okay, even a fatigue is a side effect or an adverse event which needs to be reported. So this is the same about the Annex C, and this is how it is linked about it. And you need to assess the case reports. It's in the WHO guidelines. It tells you easily about how it needs to be done. And the communication, where you need to communicate with different authorities all over to get a consolidated report of what's happening. There are 2 forms. These are last 2 slides on the website, in the WHO website, which tells you about the ADR reporting on how it needs to be reported. It's the same for all the drugs, and the classification of the coding, which I just mentioned. Some best practices, I would say, in Japan, integration of herbal medicine is done. So that's a big thing. So I would like to applaud saying that the ethical campo is well integrated in the common medicine. It's done. The second best practice which I could find was in Mali. Now this has a high level of government and it supports it. It's already integrated. It's there in their system. They use the drugs. About the advantage here is widely available and affordable. So these are the 2 things which I even mentioned. Why to need to use it is, but you need a safety in place. So that's even the one thing which I would like to say is which will reduce the friction between modern medicine and the people who prescribe herbs is medical students are taught about it in the first year. Okay, they should not be kept against it. They should know what Ayurveda, they should know what Chinese medicine is. They should know what are the traditional medicines in their first or second year in the educational system. And that's going to reduce the friction which is caused now. And we are talking about it right now. So that's the recommendation of WHO. And okay, this is just a future, some thoughts from my side, how you can be good in safety is we can, when you, some of them I understand are doing some animal studies. I was just having a discussion on gentamicin induced studies, etc. We can use these kind of models in the animal studies, which can be useful. We can have clinical studies specifically on that, and some pharmacovigilance and early data can be collected in the clinical evidence. So some suggestions on this, it's already in the publication and can be used. So why are we talking about this all? The last slide. 2025, the market analysis tells you there's a huge rise in the Asia and the ASEAN market. We're talking on sitting on 48.18 billion USD by 2025. Okay, so there's a huge market for even the pharma companies to come into this, but regulatory authorities are not going to listen if you're not going to provide all these data on standardization and safety, which we spoke about. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.